baby, and I'll do it by myself.
A shocking confession from the Tennessee teacher accused of raping her former student. A phone recording apparently captures her saying she's pregnant with a 12-year-old boy's unborn child.
I tried to tell you when it comes out looking like you.
The poor child that she raped, and now this unborn child who's going to be growing up in this really uncertain world where his mother may be in jail and the child and his father is just this teenager. So who knows what's going to end up coming of that unborn child.
Attorney and trial consultant Dina Saig-Dahl tells Law&Crime Network the case is seemingly stacked against 38-year-old Alissa McCommon.
It even sounds like they have nude pictures of her, which that in itself, there's absolutely no reason that a teacher would be sending nude pictures to their child. So right there, the case is very strong. And then if you do have these other text messages that you can show as her, again, the voicemail, which is very damaging against her, if they can also show that that is her, plus the testimony from the children themselves, I do think they have a very strong case here.
Law&Crime Network first covered McCommon's case back in September when she was arrested in Covington, Tennessee, about an hour northeast of Memphis. Officials had been tipped off in late August about a potential sexual assault case. Investigators said McCommon began speaking to former students through video games, but that quickly escalated to conversations via social media apps and ultimately the sending of explicit photos. Prosecutors say she raped one of her former students, a 12-year-old boy, in her own home. Multiple other students have since come forward with similar accusations. At the time, McCommon was released on $25,000 bond, but just last week she was arrested again, this time for sending threatening messages to the 12-year-old victim.
Anytime you have a sexual abuse of a child, it's a serious allegation where an individual is facing potential jail time, potential registration as a sex offender for arguably the rest of their lives. Now you add to it the fact that after they're arrested, after they know that they're caught, they proceed to reach out to the victim and victimize them yet again. I think any judge, any prosecutor is going to view whatever sentence and kind of raise the bar in terms of how serious this case is.
After news of that arrest broke, we spoke with Law&Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman, who said McCommon was in direct violation of her bond.
When an individual is released on bond, they are specifically told they're to have absolutely no contact whatsoever with the victims or potential witnesses in the case. So it is a little unexpected that quite a short time after she's released, she decides that it's a good idea to reach out again to one of her 12-year-old victims and threaten them in terms of them going forward with this case.
But it was during a court hearing on Tuesday that even more shocking news was revealed.
I will never text you again. You will never hear from me again. Just please don't say anything. I'm under so much stress and I'm so scared all the time.
Prosecutors played the recording, arguing it's McCommon's voice admitting to the rape by saying the 12-year-old victim fathered her child.
I tried to tell you when it comes out looking like you. We don't have to talk anymore. Just please, God, tell me you're not going to say anything. I'll never speak to you again.
McCommon allegedly said she plans to raise the child.
I'll raise this baby and I'll love this baby and I'll do it by myself.
This story just gets worse and worse, definitely for her. And from the standpoint of if these allegations are true, kind of the trauma that she caused this child that she raped and now is pregnant by.
After her second arrest, McCommon was charged with coercion of a witness, aggravated stalking, and harassment.
But this is really an extension of the harassment, and you saw some of that coercive power that she used, I'm sure, in order to even rape the child to begin with. In this continuation, she's holding this kind of power over him, thinking that he still wanted to see her, still wanted to talk to her. Her threat is that I'm never going to talk to you again, assuming that's even still what he wants. She's either delusional or she really holds this kind of power, which she did, right? I mean, she was in a power position that hugely abused, in order to rape this child. And sadly, she's continuing to use that to abuse the child further with all these threats she's making in the phone call.
But Seigdahl says it's still possible McCommon isn't really pregnant.
Is it possible that maybe she said she was pregnant as a way of trying to coerce the victim to not talk? Because that sounded like what she was trying to do in that voicemail. Or what, is she actually pregnant? And then this trauma now involves like a second victim, this unborn child. That, will remain to be seen, I think.
But if she is pregnant, Seigdahl says that's not really relevant to McCommon's rape charge.
I cannot see how her being pregnant necessarily is relevant at trial. That would be why anybody would have to be forced to give up DNA, let's say, like a swab of a DNA, if it's relevant for identification purposes, as part of your charges, as part of the trial. But whether or not she's actually pregnant is really irrelevant in terms of whether or not she raped this child. And so I don't think her being pregnant is something that they would be able to compel, but they will certainly be able to use her voicemail where she says she's pregnant at trial. And I guess at that point, if she wants to rebut it for any reason, she could put forth evidence saying that she is pregnant or isn't pregnant. But my guess is they'll just use the voicemail, and whether or not she actually is or isn't, it will just be kind of time will tell.
And a paternity test likely won't be court ordered.
I don't think at that point a paternity test would just be made in order to if the victim's family wants to know whether or not he's indeed the father of that child. And I imagine, especially if she's convicted and is jailed, they may want some sort of legal custody over that child. I mean, that's open for question, but it really then becomes kind of more of a custody issue. Whether or not she raped him, that is her charge, is rape. Again, is irrelevant whether or not that crime results in a pregnancy. Really, at that point, it becomes the child who's going to raise the child. It's really horrible because, again, if this really happened, what it seems like it has, there are multiple victims, the poor child that she raped, and now this unborn child who's going to be growing up in this really uncertain world where his mother may be in jail and the child and his father is just this teenager. So who knows what's going to end up coming of that unborn child.
But Seigdahl says it's possible the recording isn't even of McCommon.
That is one of the things, her lawyer is saying, is that she didn't leave the voicemail, that you just have this woman's voice on there and you can't prove it's her. She doesn't say that it's her on the voicemail. And so that's definitely going to be a point that they will bring up in terms of whether or not this is admissible against her. To begin with, because if you can't say it's her, it certainly wouldn't be admissible against her. But what the prosecution is saying, and really investigators are saying, is that she always used like a code word in her communication with the victim to identify that this was her. She would do the code word and then she would send nude pictures of herself. And that this same code word was used before she left this voicemail, kind of threatening him and talking about being pregnant. And so they're saying this is why they think it was her that left the voicemail, as well as the fact that this was one of the phone numbers that she evidently used in communicating with some of the other students she had communicated with. So that is some evidence that it is her. But does it rise to the level of making it, verifiable enough, let's say, for a judge to actually admit it against her in a criminal trial? I think that's a little bit unclear at this point. You would really have to see all of the evidence that they're showing.
Investigators say before her initial arrest, McCommon used a code word to confirm the 12-year-old victim was alone. Upon her second arrest, they say the same code word was mentioned during her exchanges, including a message suggesting the boy would regret going to the authorities. Seigdahl says that code word could play a part in whether the phone recording is allowed in court.
Maybe somebody else knew this code word and could have used this code word as a way to, make it strengthen the case against her. Let's say, a relative of the victim. Certainly her defense lawyer is going to say people had access to this code word. Somebody else used it. And kind of framing her. And I actually think that it will be hard for the prosecution to overcome that at this point from what we know so far. So I think there's a question of whether or not that voicemail will be admissible in the end of the day.
On top of that, voice experts could be brought in to determine whose voice is speaking.
I think that they will certainly do voice experts, let's say, or voice technology. They might also do location data, as we know. Can they tell where this phone call was originated from? Was it in a similar place? Was it her home, let's say, or similar places other phone calls are originated from? I mean, we've seen lots of trials where the technology from cell phones is vast and is often used against the defense. So we are really early on in terms of kind of what the prosecution can do to authenticate this call. Not that they can't, but there is a hurdle they're going to have to get over in order to be able to admit this at court.
And it's still possible more charges are yet to come.
It's possible because it sounds like they're continuing to investigate whether or not she did this to other children. They say that she had inappropriate relationships with other children. Is it possible that maybe these other children just haven't told their full story and she has in fact raped more than one of them? They're even still asking for parents to see whether or not their children had calls from unknown numbers that they don't recognize, thinking that it could be her. So I do think that it's possible that further charges may come. Unfortunately, as we see, people who abuse children tend not to do it just the one time. So it is likely that there will be other victims out there who may come forward.
As for what's next, Saig Dahl says that's still up in the air.
I mean, it really depends whether or not she is willing to waive her right to a speedy trial or not. And that's, unclear. The fact that she had her bond revoked and she's going to be in jail until trial, she may waive it, and we may see this case moving forward rather quickly.
After her initial arrest, McCommon was suspended without pay from her school district. Right now, she's being held without bond at the Tipton County Jail. She's due back in court on November 27th. Law&Crime Network reached out to her attorney for a comment on this story, but have not heard back. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Gillespie.